The air in the room was suddenly sucked out. The sound of my fork and knife clattering against my porcelain plate was deafening in the tense silence, a jarring note amidst the aroma of the lasagna my mother insisted was my favorite. It wasn't, but I had stopped correcting such minor details years ago. $480,000. My father Robert repeated his voice as deep and final as a judge's gavel determining a fate. He set his glass of red wine down on the meticulously polished oak table, a deliberate gesture to emphasize the finality of his words. That's half Ava. Non-negotiable. I looked at him, then at my mother Susan, who sat opposite me, her hands clasped over her ivory-colored napkin. She wore a strained smile, one I knew all too well, one designed to soothe to make the most unreasonable demands seem reasonable. "Darling, think of it as an investment in the family," she said, her voice soft and persuasive. "In all of our futures. Leo's company is at a critical point. This is a chance to help your brother and secure your father and me in our old age." Leo, my ever-privileged younger brother, sat beside my mother, nodding slightly. He wore a crisply ironed designer shirt, his hair perfectly styled, exuding a confidence that only those who have never truly failed can possess. "Sis, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity," he said, his tone as if he were pitching to venture capitalists rather than his newly lottery-winning sister. "We're talking about a groundbreaking algorithm that could change the healthcare industry. The returns could be 10, even 20 times the initial investment. You'd be a major shareholder." I felt a dry, bitter laugh bubble up in my chest. A week ago, I was Ava, a 28-year-old administrative assistant in San Jose struggling with student debt and living in a cramped apartment where rent consumed more than half my monthly salary. My life was a series of budget spreadsheets, instant noodle dinners, and the distant dream of one day owning a small house. Then a lottery ticket bought on a whim at a convenience store changed everything. $960,000 after taxes, a life-altering sum. And now at this congratulatory dinner in my childhood home in the affluent suburbs of the San Francisco Bay Area, my family wasn't celebrating me. They were dividing my prize. Or, I managed to keep my voice steady, it could fail and nearly $500,000 of my dollars would vanish into thin air. The silence returned. This time it was heavier, more suffocating. My father's expression hardened. "Family helps family, Ava." "Really?" The laugh finally escaped. Not a sound of joy, but a sharp, ironic burst. "Do you actually believe that—" My mother frowned. "Ava, don't speak like that. We've given you everything." "Everything?" I asked, and the dam I had held back for 20 years began to crack. "Do you remember my 16th birthday I saved up for 2 years from my coffee shop job? And you helped with $2,000 to buy a used Honda Civic with over 100,000 miles on it. You said it would teach me responsibility. 2 years later, Leo got a brand new Ford Mustang, the Sports Edition, as a surprise. I guess he didn't need to learn about responsibility." I turned to Leo, who was staring intently at his plate, clearly uncomfortable. "And college Leo. You paid his full $65,000 a year tuition to Stanford without a second thought. Meanwhile, I had to take out $45,000 in loans to graduate from San Jose State, and I'm still paying them off. You said times were tough, but it seems they were only tough for me, weren't they?" Each word was a painful memory thrown onto the dinner table. The $50,000 investment for Leo to start his first empire, while I had to claw my way up from minimum wage. The praise lavished on Leo's B's and C's, while my A's earned a dismissive nod. "Circumstances were different then." My father growled, his face flushing. "We did what we could." "No," I said, my voice now surprisingly cold and clear even to myself. "The circumstances were always the same. He was the golden child, and I was not. And now that I finally have something of my own, something that is purely mine, by a stroke of luck you expect me to hand half of it over to him. Again." "That's enough." Robert slammed his hand on the table, making the glasses jump and the wine slosh. "Listen here, young lady. We are not asking you to give anything away. This is a legitimate business opportunity. Furthermore, we are your parents. We sacrificed for years to give you a good life. We put a roof over your head, food on the table, clothes on your back. That's the bare minimum required by law. I retorted, my calmness astonishing even myself. Whereas you gave Leo every possible advantage in the world. This isn't about you and Leo, my mother said, though her gaze instinctively darted to her precious son. This is about family supporting each other in a time of need. Where was that family support when I needed it? I asked. When I was drowning in debt and working overtime just to pay my bills, when I had to face every hardship alone. Where was that support? Their silence was the loudest answer. My father stood up, his shadow, falling long across the table, eclipsing the warm light from the chandelier. All pretense was gone from his face, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. No, Ava. This is not a choice. It's an obligation. $480,000 will be transferred to Leo's company account by the end of next week. Those are our terms. Terms? I whispered, unable to believe my ears. Yes, he said, his voice a death sentence. Either you agree to the transfer, or you are no longer welcome in this family. No holidays, no phone calls, no relationship. You decide your bank account or your family. Which is more important? The room spun. The ultimatum hung in the air, toxic and irrevocable. I looked at my mother, desperate for a flicker of protest, a hint of hesitation on her face. But there was nothing. She just looked down at her hands, her silence a complete complicity. Leo remained mute, his discomfort not strong enough to make him speak up against his father. And in that moment, with a painful clarity, I understood. Nothing had changed. I had always been the outsider, always less valuable, always the one expected to sacrifice while Leo received. The only difference was that now I had the power to say no. I slowly stood up, gathering my purse and jacket. I felt strangely empty, as if I were watching a scene from a tragic movie. I have always been the second choice in this family, I said, my voice no longer trembling. The backup child, the one expected to succeed without support, to give without receiving. I was foolish to think that winning the lottery could change how you see me. I was wrong. I walked towards the front door, each step feeling like I was leaving a part of my life behind. I turned back one last time. The dining room light highlighted their stunned faces, frozen in a moment of greed and challenged entitlement. You've made your choice, I said, and now I'm making mine. I opened the front door and stepped out into the cool California night. The sound of the door slamming shut behind me was like a gunshot, ending one chapter of my life and beginning a new, utterly solitary one. The drive home from Palo Alto to San Jose that night was a blur of hot tears and streaking streetlights. I don't remember changing lanes or stopping at red lights. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white, trying to hold on to something tangible, while my world dissolved. The old Honda Civic, the very symbol of my hard-won independence, now felt like a lonely tin can hurtling through an uncertain night. My apartment, which had always felt like a cramped but safe haven, greeted me with a heavy silence. It was no longer a sanctuary. It had become an island. I slammed the door shut, slid down to the floor, and finally allowed myself to shatter. Sobs racked my body. Not just for the cruel ultimatum, but for the loss of an illusion I had clung to for 28 years, the illusion of a family that loved me unconditionally. I cried for the 6-year-old Ava, who didn't understand why her brother's birthday parties were always grander. I cried for the teenage Ava, who had to give up the art class she dreamed of. I cried for the young woman Ava, who had shouldered her college debt alone. I cried until there were no tears left, only a hollow, throbbing ache. I called in sick on Monday, something I rarely did. I couldn't face the benign questions of my colleagues, couldn't focus on numbers and insurance clauses. My mind replayed the dinner table conversation on a loop, analyzing every word, every look, trying to find something I could have done differently. But there was nothing. The outcome had been decided long before that lottery ticket was ever printed. By Tuesday, the storm began. First came the texts from my mother, a toxic blend of guilt and anger. I cried all night thinking about how you've abandoned us, the first one read. A few hours later, another, "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us." My father's texts were more terse and authoritarian. "You are making a grave mistake, Ava," and "Family comes before money." I replied only once, typing the letters with trembling fingers. "I'm not choosing money over family. I'm choosing my self-respect. Please respect my decision." Then I muted their conversation thread, unable to bear the constant pings that felt like needles jabbing at my raw heart. By the end of the week, the extended family began to weigh in the flying monkeys, sent to do their bidding. My Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, left a cloyingly sweet voicemail. "Ava dear, everyone is so worried about this situation. Your parents are heartbroken. Surely there's some way to compromise. You know Leo has always looked up to you." That last blatant lie almost made me laugh if the situation weren't so painful. Then came my Uncle Mark, my father's brother, with a more direct approach. "Your father tells me you've come into some money and are refusing to help the family. That doesn't sound like the Ava I know. Your brother has a real opportunity, and family is supposed to have each other's backs." It became clear that my parents were weaving a narrative throughout the extended family. Ava, the ungrateful daughter, had received a windfall and selfishly refused to help her struggling brother and parents. Not a word about the ultimatum, the demand for half my assets, or the years of preferential treatment Leo had received. The pressure mounted, and I felt my resolve begin to waver. Maybe I was being selfish. Maybe $480 to $1,000 was a reasonable ask from family. On a lonely Sunday afternoon, in a moment of weakness, I actually logged into my bank account, my finger hovering over the transfer button. The thought of being welcomed back into the family fold was tempting, even if it came at such a high price. Just before I could click, my phone rang. It was Chloe, a colleague who had become a close friend over the past 2 years. I had confided in her about the lottery win and the subsequent fallout. "Are you okay?" she asked immediately. "Not at all," I admitted, my voice cracking. "I'm about to send them the money just to make this nightmare end." Chloe's response was immediate and firm. "Ava, listen to me. What your family is doing is emotional blackmail, plain and simple. If you give in now, you are setting a precedent that will follow you for the rest of your life. Every major decision, every financial windfall, they will expect to have a say. Is that what you want?" Her words were a jolt of electricity through the fog of my guilt and self-doubt. "No," I whispered. "But I don't want to lose my family either." "A family that only wants you when you can be financially useful isn't a family worth protecting at all costs," Chloe said gently but firmly. "I know that sounds harsh, but as someone who has watched you work harder than anyone else in the office while dealing with constant financial stress, I can't stand by and watch you give away your chance at security and independence." That conversation was the lifeline I needed. I logged out of my bank account. Instead, I went online and booked an appointment with a therapist specializing in family trauma. If I was going to navigate this new reality, I was going to need professional support. The harassment from my family continued for another week before I finally took the drastic step of blocking their numbers. The constant barrage of guilt, anger, and manipulation was destroying my mental health. I couldn't heal while still connected to the source of my pain. The silence after blocking their numbers was both terrifying and liberating. It left a huge void in my life, but it also gave me space to breathe for the first time in weeks. Sitting in my quiet apartment, I realized that loneliness could be frightening, but losing myself was infinitely more so. I had chosen myself at that dinner table, and now I had to keep choosing myself every single day. The therapy appointment was the next step. It wasn't a sign of weakness, but the first act in rebuilding my life on my own terms. The first few weeks of absolute silence were a form of torture. Every morning I woke with a jolt of panic, habitually reaching for my phone, expecting the barbed messages. When I found none, the initial relief was quickly replaced by a profound sadness, a reminder of the irreparable break. My childhood home, with all its complicated memories, now felt as distant as another planet. My first therapy session with Dr. Ramirez was difficult. I recounted my story, my voice catching with emotion at times, feeling both foolish and heartbroken as I narrated the seemingly small injustices that had piled up into a mountain of resentment. Dr. Ramirez, a calm woman with empathetic eyes, listened without judgment. "Ava," she said after I finished, "what you're experiencing isn't just sadness. It's grief. You're grieving the loss of the family you have, but more importantly, you're grieving for the family you deserved but never had." Those words struck a deep chord of truth within me. I hadn't just lost my parents and brother. I had lost the hope that they would one day see me, truly see me. Dr. Ramirez helped me identify the patterns of emotional abuse that had shaped my life, the constant comparisons to Leo, the withholding of affection and support as a form of control, and the underlying message that I was somehow less than. The lottery win didn't create this problem, she pointed out. It merely illuminated the dynamics that were always there. Sometimes it takes a crisis to reveal the true nature of relationships. Her words were both painful and strangely freeing. I wasn't crazy, I wasn't selfish. I was a survivor of years of emotional invalidation. Armed with this new understanding, I began the process of intentional rebuilding. The first step was leaving my old apartment. It held too many memories of struggle and loneliness. With the help of the financial advisors I had hired right after my win, I purchased a 2-bedroom condo in a vibrant neighborhood in downtown San Jose. The building had security, a gym, and a small balcony overlooking the green hills in the distance. For the first time in my life, I felt completely secure in my own home. Decorating the new place became an unexpected form of therapy. I chose each piece carefully, not based on price, but on whether it brought me joy. A teal velvet sofa, a reclaimed wood dining table, colorful abstract art. Each item was a declaration of my identity separate from the expectations and tastes of my family. Next, I tackled my finances. I paid off my remaining student loan debt in a single transaction, feeling a physical weight lift from my shoulders. I worked with my advisors to set up a diversified investment portfolio designed for long-term growth and security. We created separate accounts for different goals, retirement, education, and a smaller fund for travel and experiences. With my financial foundation secure, I turned my attention to my professional aspirations. I had always dreamed of getting my Master of Business Administration (MBA) to open new career doors, but the cost had always been an insurmountable barrier. Now I researched and applied to a part-time MBA program at Santa Clara University, a well-respected business school. The acceptance letter arrived on a rainy afternoon. I stood in my new kitchen staring at the official letterhead with tears streaming down my face. This was an accomplishment I had earned. My college grades, my work experience, and my application essays had secured my spot. The lottery win had simply removed the financial hurdle. This acceptance was all mine. As my new life began to take shape, I realized I needed more than just financial and educational growth. I needed community. At Dr. Ramirez's suggestion, I joined a support group for adults from dysfunctional families. Meeting others who understood the complex emotions of family estrangement was validating in a way I didn't know I needed. It was there I met Jessica, a 32-year-old marketing director who had cut ties with her narcissistic mother 3 years prior. "The first year is the hardest," she told me after one particularly emotional session. "You'll second-guess yourself constantly, but then it gets easier. You start building your chosen family, people who value you for who you are, not for what you can give them." Jessica and I quickly became close friends. She introduced me to her circle, a warm and genuine group of people who welcomed me without judgment or ulterior motives. For the first time, I experienced relationships based on mutual respect and affection, rather than obligation or comparison. My professional life began to transform as well. Freed from the constant pressure of financial instability, I approached my job with a new focus and creativity. I proposed process improvements that saved my department significant time and resources, earning recognition from senior management. 6 months after moving into my new home, I was offered a promotion to a team lead position. "You've really come into your own these past few months, Ava." my boss remarked during my promotion discussion. There's a confidence in your work that wasn't there before. The irony was not lost on me that pulling away from my biological family had created the space for me to flourish in ways I never imagined. By removing the constant undercurrent of inadequacy that had defined my family relationships, I had freed up emotional energy to invest in my own growth and happiness. I was learning to set and maintain boundaries. I was learning to trust my own judgment. I was learning to love myself not for what I could achieve, but simply for who I was. The ashes of my old life were still there, a reminder of the pain that had passed. But from those ashes, something new and strong was beginning to form, a life built on self-respect, autonomy, and authentic joy. 6 months after my fateful break with my family, I met Daniel. It was at a fundraiser for a local literacy program, something I'd gotten involved with at Jessica's suggestion. I wasn't there looking for a relationship. I was there to connect with my community, to invest my time in something meaningful beyond my career and studies. Daniel was a high school English teacher volunteering at the event. He had kind eyes and an easy smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. He didn't have my brother's flashy looks or overbearing confidence. Instead, he radiated a calm, centered energy that was instantly disarming. We struck up a conversation over a shared love for John Steinbeck, and the talk flowed effortlessly. He asked thoughtful questions and actually listened to the answers. He was curious about my work, my MBA program, and why I was passionate about the literacy program. Not once during our conversation did he ask about the watch I was wearing or the brand of my handbag. Our first date was a 5-hour walk around Lake Merritt in Oakland. We talked about everything from our favorite movies to our childhood fears. When the inevitable topic of family came up, I had a simplified, curated version ready. I said I was taking some space from my family due to irreconcilable differences. I braced myself for prying questions, subtle judgment, or worse, platitudes about how family is everything. Daniel's response surprised me. He simply nodded, his gaze free of judgment. Family is complicated, he said. I believe relationships should be measured by their impact on your well-being, not by blood or obligation. That sentence, spoken so simply and sincerely, felt like a balm. He gave me the space to own my story without needing to defend or explain it. As our relationship grew, Daniel was a model of consistent respect for my boundaries. He never pushed me to reconcile or suggested I was overreacting responses I had encountered from others. Instead, he supported my decisions while being a shoulder to lean on during the difficult moments. The first Thanksgiving after the estrangement was particularly tough. Though friends including Chloe and Jessica invited me to their celebrations, the absence of family traditions left a void I couldn't quite shake. Daniel, noticing my melancholy, didn't try to falsely cheer me up. Instead, he suggested we create a new tradition of our own. We spent the day hiking in Big Sur, followed by dinner at a small coastal diner. It wasn't Thanksgiving, but it was special, and it was ours. Christmas brought similar challenges. Memories of childhood excitement and family rituals created a bittersweet ache. I found myself questioning if I had made the right choice. Was financial independence worth the loss of family connection? However flawed those connections were. During those moments, I would often call Daniel. He would listen as I poured out my doubts, not to solve my problems, but just to be there. Feeling grief doesn't mean you were wrong, Ava, he would often say. Difficult decisions can still be the right ones, even when they hurt. My relationship with Daniel taught me what a healthy partnership looked like. It was a give and take, a mutual support system, and an acceptance of each other's true selves. He celebrated my successes without feeling threatened. He comforted me in my setbacks without being patronizing. With him, I wasn't the lottery winner or the estranged daughter. I was just Ava. At the same time, my chosen family grew stronger. Chloe. Jessica and I had standing Friday night dinners where we would cook, watch movies, and talk about the highs and lows of our week. They filled a part of the void my biological family left, not with obligation, but with love and conscious choice. Still, the ghost of my old family lingered. Occasionally, I would get an email from a distant cousin or an aunt, clumsily veiled attempts at reconciliation that were really about probing to see if I had changed my mind about helping the family. With Dr. Ramirez's help, I learned how to respond calmly but firmly. "I value our relationship," I wrote to one aunt. "But my financial decisions are not a topic for discussion. If you wish to stay in touch, it needs to be separate from the situation between me and my parents." Most never wrote back, which confirmed their interest was more as emissaries than out of genuine concern. While painful, these clarifying moments helped me sort the authentic connections from those tainted by ulterior motives. A year after the lottery win, I took time to reflect on how much had changed. Financially, I was secure. Educationally, I was thriving in my MBA program. Professionally, I had been promoted. Personally, I had developed genuine friendships and a promising romantic relationship. But most importantly, I had started to recognize my own worth independent of external validation. The constant feeling of inadequacy that had followed me since childhood was slowly being replaced by a quiet confidence and resilience. The journey wasn't easy, but for the first time I felt like I was on the right path, guided by my own internal compass, not by a map drawn by someone else. And Daniel was there, walking beside me, not to show me the way, but to hold my hand on the path I had chosen for myself. 18 months after I walked out of my childhood home life, had settled into a new rhythm, one of my own making. I was more than halfway through my MBA program with excellent grades. My new leadership role at work was challenging but rewarding, and my relationship with Daniel had become a solid, nurturing foundation. The wounds from the family estrangement were no longer a daily throbbing pain. They had become scars, a reminder of a battle I had fought and won for my own soul. I had created new holiday traditions with Daniel and my friends. I had celebrated milestones with my chosen family. I had built a life that felt increasingly authentic and whole. Then, on an ordinary Wednesday morning, an email appeared in my inbox. The sender was an address I recognized instantly, one I hadn't seen in nearly a year and a half. My mother. The subject line was just 3 words: "When you're ready." My heart hammered against my ribs. Part of me wanted to hit delete immediately to protect the peace I had fought so hard to establish. But another part, the part that was still the little girl who craved her parents' love, despite everything, needed to know what it said. After a few deep breaths and a quick text to Dr. Ramirez, asking for an emergency session that evening, I clicked the email open. "Ava," it began with no "dear" or "my darling daughter." "I hope you are well. A lot has changed since we last spoke, and I believe it's time we had a conversation. Leo's company has closed, and your father and I are facing financial difficulties we did not anticipate." My stomach clenched. Here it was. The opening act. "This is not an attempt to ask for money," the next line read, and I had to read it twice. "I want to be clear about that. Rather, this is an acknowledgement that we may have made mistakes that cannot be undone, but can perhaps be better understood through dialogue. If you are willing, we would be grateful for the chance to meet in person. We will respect whatever boundaries you need to feel comfortable. Mom." The email was entirely different from their previous communications. There was no emotional manipulation, no accusations, no demands. The tone was subdued, almost humble, a quality so foreign to my mother that I read it over and over, trying to find the angle I was so used to. That evening in Dr. Ramirez's office, we dissected the email. "What do you want from this potential meeting?" Dr. Ramirez asked. "Forget what they might want or expect. What outcome would feel positive for you?" It was a clarifying question. After careful thought, I realized I wanted 3 things: an acknowledgement of the unfair treatment throughout my life, a genuine apology, and respect for my boundaries moving forward. I didn't expect to get all 3, but identifying my desires helped me approach the situation with clearer expectations. "Meeting them doesn't obligate you to do anything," Dr. Ramirez reminded me. "You can leave at any time if it becomes unhealthy, and you get to set the terms, including the location and duration." After a few days of reflection and a long talk with Daniel, who was completely supportive of whatever I decided, I replied to my mother's email. I suggested we meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown that was private enough for conversation but still a public space. I set a 1-hour time limit and made it clear I would be coming alone. I am willing to listen, I wrote, but I need to be clear that this meeting does not automatically change our current situation. I am still processing everything that happened. My mother replied within hours, agreeing to all my conditions without argument. Another surprising departure from her usual approach. We set the meeting for the following Saturday afternoon. As the day approached, I felt a mixture of anxiety and a strange sense of calm. I chose an outfit that made me feel confident and composed, a tailored blazer over a simple top. This was not little Ava seeking approval. This was Ava, the woman who had stood on her own. I arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early, chose a quiet corner table, and centered myself. When my parents walked in right on time, the sight of them stunned me. In just 18 months, they seemed to have aged years. My father's confident posture was diminished, his shoulders slightly slumped. My mother had more gray in her hair than I remembered, and the lines around her eyes and mouth were deeper. "Ava," my mother said softly as they approached the table, "thank you for agreeing to meet." "You look well," my father added, his usual booming voice now subdued. I gestured to the chairs opposite me. The initial small talk was awkward as we navigated the unfamiliar territory of a conversation after such a major rupture. Once we had our drinks, my father cleared his throat. "I suppose we should address the elephant in the room. Leo's company failed completely about 6 months ago. We lost everything we had invested, including the second mortgage on the house." "We are not here to ask you for money," my mother quickly interjected, perhaps seeing something in my expression. "That's not why we wanted to talk to you." "Then why are you—" I asked, my tone direct. My father looked down at his coffee cup. "Because we were wrong," he said, the words clearly difficult for him. "Not just about the money, though, that's true too, but about everything." I waited, unwilling to fill the silence or make this easier for them. After a moment, my mother continued, her eyes welling up. "When you left that night, we were angry and hurt. We told ourselves you were being selfish and ungrateful. But as time went on and we actually thought about what you had said, about how we treated you versus Leo, we started to see things differently. We favored him," my father admitted, his voice hoarse. "We made excuses for it. We expected you to forge your own path while we gave him every advantage." They began to recount specific memories: the 16th birthday car, the discrepancy in college support, the lack of interest in my achievements. That they remembered the exact details was surprising. I had expected generalities, not evidence that they had actually reflected. "Where is Leo now?" I asked, noticing his conspicuous absence. "He'll be here shortly," my father said. "He wanted to give us time to talk first. He's different." As if on cue, the coffee shop door opened and Leo walked in. Like my parents, he looked changed. The arrogant swagger, expensive clothes, and air of entitlement were gone. He approached cautiously, carrying a humility I had never seen in him before. "Ava," he said with a small nod. "Thanks for agreeing to see us." He sat in the empty chair. "See." He began, looking me directly in the eye. "I owe you an apology more than anyone." The entire coffee shop seemed to go silent. The whir of the espresso machine at the bar, the low murmur of conversation from other tables, it all faded away. There was only me and the 3 people who had once been the center of my universe, now feeling like strangers trying to read a worn-out map. "An apology," I repeated, not because I hadn't heard, but because I needed time to process the phrase, especially coming from Leo's mouth. My golden boy brother, who I had never once heard admit to a single mistake in his entire life. Leo took a deep, steadying breath, his eyes never leaving mine. For never acknowledging the advantages I had, he said, his voice even and serious. For taking it for granted that I deserved more support, more opportunities, more everything than you. And for standing by silently that night when Dad gave his ultimatum, even though I knew it was wrong. The specificity of his apology hit through the layers of defense I had so carefully constructed. I had come prepared for excuses, for subtle attempts at blame shifting, for another version of the family helps family narrative. I was not prepared for this blunt self-awareness. What happened after the company failed? I asked, genuine curiosity stirring inside me for the first time, overriding the anger and hurt. Leo gave a wry, humorless smile that didn't reach his tired eyes. Reality happened. I lost everything. Not just my parents' money, but other investors' money too. I lost the illusion that I was some kind of business genius. Turns out I wasn't the next Steve Jobs, just a spoiled kid who'd never had to face a real consequence for failure. He had to move out of our basement, my mother added, and for the first time I heard a note of real pride in her voice when speaking of her son, a pride not based on phantom achievements, but on growth. He had to get a real job. I'm working in IT support, Leo said. Entry level. The pay isn't great, but it's honest work. I'm paying my own rent in a small apartment, chipping away at my debts. I'm learning the things you've known since you graduated college, what financial responsibility actually looks like. Silence settled over the table again, but this time it wasn't tense. It was filled with the weight of unspoken confessions. Why now? I asked, looking at all three of them. Why reach out, after all this time? My father leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. Because it took us this long to truly understand what we'd done, he said. And because we realized that while we lost our investments, what you lost was so much more important. You lost the belief that your family loved you unconditionally. That's a greater loss than any amount of money. We don't expect forgiveness, my mother said, her voice trembling. We just wanted you to know that we see now what we couldn't or wouldn't see before. I studied their faces one by one, searching for the telltale signs of insincerity. But all I saw was genuine regret, weariness, and a deep, profound sadness. They looked like people who had lost a war they didn't even know they were fighting. I can't pretend the past didn't happen, I said carefully. The patterns were too consistent, too damaging for too long. We're not asking you to, my father replied. We're just hoping that maybe with time and better boundaries, we could find a way to have some kind of relationship again. On your terms, not ours. Leo cleared his throat. I know I have no right to ask you for anything, Ava, but if there's any possibility of us starting over as adults, as equals this time, I'd like the chance to try. I thought of all the work I'd done in therapy, of all the progress I'd made in building a life centered on self-respect and healthy relationships. Reconciliation had never been my goal. Survival had been. But now an unexpected possibility was presenting itself. I can't make any promises, I said finally, my words heavy. But I am willing to consider small steps, very small, with very clear boundaries. A wave of palpable relief washed over their faces, tempered by caution. They understood this wasn't forgiveness or a wiping of the slate. This was merely the cracking open of a door that had seemed permanently sealed. There is one thing I can offer, I said after a moment's thought, and I saw a flash of hope in their eyes, before I quickly extinguished it. Not money, I clarified. But Leo, if you're serious about rebuilding your career from the ground up, I could put in a good word for you at my company. Leo looked up, his eyes wide with surprise. We have entry-level positions in the IT department that might fit your skills, I continued. You'd have to interview and prove yourself like anyone else. I can't guarantee anything, but I can at least get your resume to the right person. It wasn't an act of charity. It was a test. A chance to see if this change was real, if he was willing to accept help from me, the person he'd always looked down on, and start at the very bottom. That's more than generous, Ava, Leo said, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you. Thank you for even considering that. As our meeting wound down, my mother reached a hand across the table but stopped halfway, not daring to touch me. We are so proud of you, Ava, she said. Not for the lottery, but for the person you are. I wish we had told you that more often when it really mattered. For the first time in our conversation, tears pricked my own eyes. Those were the words I had longed to hear my entire childhood and young adulthood. The validation I had sought through every achievement. They came too late to heal the old wounds completely, but their belated arrival still meant something. "Thank you for saying that," I replied softly. "It still matters even now." We parted with tentative plans to check in a month, no commitments beyond that single future conversation. As I watched them walk away, I felt not the elation of vindication or the warmth of reconciliation, but something far more complex. A cautious hope that maybe with time and a lot of sustained effort from all sides, a new form of family could be forged. One built on mutual respect, not obligation or comparison. One where I finally could be seen. The walk from the coffee shop back to my car felt longer than usual. My mind was reeling from what had just transpired. The meeting had been nothing like the scenarios I had played out in my head. There was no shouting, no accusations, no manipulation, just acknowledgement, regret, and a painful, fragile honesty. I called Daniel as soon as I got home and told him everything. He listened patiently, interjecting only with gentle questions. "How are you feeling?" he asked when I finished. "Confused," I admitted. Like the ground just shifted under my feet. For 18 months, my story has been simple. They were wrong. I was right to leave. But now, it's more complicated. "Complicated doesn't mean your decision was wrong," he reminded me gently. "It just means the story is continuing." My offer to Leo was not an empty one. The next day, I emailed HR attaching his resume with a brief note stating he was an acquaintance seeking an entry-level position. I made it clear he would have to go through the standard hiring process. I had done my part. The rest was up to him. 2 weeks later, Leo called me. His voice had an excitement I'd never heard before. "Ava, I got it," he exclaimed. "I went through 3 rounds of interviews, and they offered me a position as a Level 1 IT support specialist. I start next month." "Congratulations, Leo," I said, and I genuinely meant it. "That was all you." "No, not all," he said quickly. "You opened the door. I won't forget that. I promise I won't let you down." It was a start. Our next meeting a month later was also at a neutral coffee shop. The air was a little less tense. We talked about Leo's new job, about my final courses in the MBA program, about my parents' plans for a road trip to Yosemite in their old car, a humble trip that was a far cry from their past luxury vacations. We were carefully rebuilding on the smallest bricks of everyday life, steering clear of the deep cracks of the past. Dr. Ramirez called this the observation phase. "Your job right now is not to forgive or forget," she advised. "It is to observe. Are their actions consistent with their words? Are they respecting your boundaries? Is the change real or temporary?" I took that advice to heart. I maintained an emotional distance, polite but not overly familiar. When my mother suggested we go shopping together, I gently declined. "Maybe not yet, Mom, but I appreciate the invitation." She accepted my answer without complaint, a small test of boundaries that she passed. Leo started his new job, and from what I heard indirectly through colleagues, he was genuinely applying himself. He came in early, stayed late, and asked humble questions. He wasn't the arrogant CEO anymore. He was a new employee trying to learn the ropes. Occasionally, we would run into each other in the company cafeteria. Our conversations were brief and work-focused, but they were real. The biggest change was perhaps in my father. He, the man who had always prided himself on his ability to provide, and his status now seemed to be finding value in other places. He started volunteering at a local food bank. He would call me not to ask for anything, but just to tell me about a book he'd read, or to ask about my day. During one call, he said haltingly, "I know I never said this enough, Ava, but I'm proud of you. Not for what you've achieved, but for the strong person you've become." Each of these small acts was a carefully laid brick in the new foundation of our relationship. It wasn't rebuilding the old demolished house. It was constructing a new structure entirely smaller, more modest, but potentially far more sound. It wasn't always easy, though. There were days when an old memory would surface and the anger would flare up again. There were times I doubted their motives, wondering if this was all a long con to eventually win back my trust and maybe my money. During those times, I would lean on Daniel, my friends, and Dr. Ramirez. They were my anchors in my new reality. They reminded me that healing isn't a straight line and that it was okay to feel skeptical. The holiday season approached that year. Thanksgiving I still spent with Daniel and our friends. But as Christmas neared, my mother called. "Ava," she began hesitantly, "your father and I, along with Leo, are just having a simple Christmas dinner. No big gifts, just being together. We understand if you have other plans, but we wanted you to know you are invited. There would be no pressure at all." It was an invitation, not a demand. The choice was entirely mine. I told her I would think about it. For days I wrestled with the decision. Part of me wanted to keep a safe distance, but another part recognized that refusing to engage was just as much an emotional choice as accepting. In the end, I came up with a compromise, a new boundary. "Thank you for the invitation," I told her on the phone. "I won't be there for dinner, but Daniel and I would like to stop by for dessert afterwards. We could stay for an hour or so." That would be wonderful, dear," my mother said, and I could hear the genuine relief in her voice. It was a small step, but it felt like a leap. For the first time in almost 2 years, I would be voluntarily entering a family space not out of obligation, but out of a conscious choice made on my own terms. It was another brick laid not perfectly, but securely. On Christmas Eve, as Daniel and I drove to the small townhouse my parents were now renting, a familiar yet alien feeling washed over me. It was the anxiety before a family event, a feeling I hadn't experienced in almost 2 years. But this time it was different. It was tempered by Daniel's steady presence beside me and the knowledge that I was in control. I could leave at any time. "You okay?" Daniel asked, placing a hand on mine. "I am," I replied, and I realized it was true. It's just strange. Their home was much smaller than our childhood house, but it was cozy. A small, simply decorated Christmas tree stood in the corner, the familiar old ornaments looking slightly oversized for its frame. The smell of baked apple pie filled the air. My parents greeted us at the door, their smiles a little shy but genuine. Leo came out from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel, and gave us a nod. "Merry Christmas," he said. The atmosphere was a bit stilted at first, but Daniel, with his social grace, quickly broke the ice by asking my father about his volunteer work and complimenting my mother on the pie. Slowly, conversation began to flow. We sat in the living room drinking tea and eating the apple pie. The talk stayed on safe subjects: work, the weather, a movie we had all seen. But what was striking was what wasn't said. There were no backhanded comments comparing me to Leo. No prying questions about my finances. No hidden expectations. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in a room with 4 adults, rather than a child trying to win parental approval. At one point, while Daniel and my father were discussing a football game, my mother turned to me. "That's a beautiful sweater, Ava," she said quietly. "Thanks, Mom," I replied. "That shade of blue suits you," she added. "It brings out your eyes." It was a simple, unadorned compliment, but it almost brought me to tears. Growing up, compliments were usually followed by a comparison. "You're good at drawing, but not as athletic as Leo," or a veiled criticism, "That dress is nice, but perhaps a bit short." This simple, pure compliment felt like a small gift. As our hour was drawing to a close, Leo brought out a small, awkwardly wrapped box. "This is for you," he said, holding it out to me. I hesitated. "We said no gifts." "It's not a big gift," he insisted. "Just a little something." I carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a digital photo frame. He had it plugged in and images began to cycle through. They were old photos he must have scanned from family albums. There was me at age 5 grinning on my first bicycle. There was me in my high school graduation gown clutching a stack of books. There was one I had forgotten of us as small children, me teaching him how to tie his shoes. There weren't many photos of us together, a true reflection of our childhoods. But the ones he had chosen were moments of me. Moments where I was happy, proud, being myself, separate from my role in the family hierarchy. I realized that for all those years we were so focused on your achievements. Leo said, his voice low. I wanted to remind everyone, myself included, that you're not just what you accomplish. You're you. The tears I had been holding back finally spilled over. I looked at my brother, this man now standing before me, and for the first time I didn't see my rival. I saw someone who was trying clumsily but sincerely to repair what was broken. Thank you, Leo, I whispered. That means a lot. We left shortly after, true to our word of a brief visit. The hugs from my parents at the door were still a bit tentative, but they were warmer. On the drive home, Daniel and I were quiet for a long time. That was an amazing gift, he finally said. Yes, I agreed, because it wasn't about money. It was about being seen. That Christmas Eve didn't erase the years of hurt. It didn't heal every crack, but it lit a small candle in a very dark room. It showed that change was possible, that relationships could evolve. 6 months later, over a quiet lunch, Leo offered the most specific and profound apology I had ever received from anyone in my family. He acknowledged the inequity plainly, without excuses. I was handed opportunities that you had to fight for, he said. I benefited from that inequality without ever questioning it. And for that, I am truly sorry. That was the moment I realized I could begin the process of forgiveness. Not because they demanded it, but because I needed it for myself. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting or condoning the past behavior. It meant releasing the power that resentment held over me. Our relationship continued to evolve in small steps. Occasional dinners, more frequent phone calls. We were still learning how to be with each other in new, healthier ways. But for the first time, I had hope. Hope that family in some form could be a part of my life again, not as a heavy obligation, but as a conscious choice, built on a new foundation of respect and truth. A year after that fateful meeting in the coffee shop, the landscape of my life had changed profoundly. The journey from estrangement to cautious reconnection had been neither linear nor simple, but it had yielded invaluable lessons. My own life continued to blossom. I had graduated from my MBA program with honors 6 months prior, an achievement I celebrated with Daniel and my close-knit group of friends. That academic success, combined with my stellar work performance, led to a promotion to Director of Strategy at my company. I now led a department of 12, mentoring young employees and shaping the company's future in meaningful ways. The financial security from the lottery win had given me the freedom to pursue this path. But the confidence to succeed had come from within, nurtured by therapy, supported by genuine relationships, and forged by navigating the most difficult challenges of my life. My relationship with Daniel had deepened into a true partnership. 3 months ago, on a weekend hike to a peak overlooking the Pacific Ocean, he got down on one knee. With a simple ring and a promise of equality, respect, and unconditional support, he asked me to marry him. I said yes, without a moment's hesitation. My family's reaction to our engagement was another measure of how much things had changed. There was no imposition, no attempt to take over the planning. Instead, my mother called and asked a simple question: "What kind of wedding do you two want, and how can we support your vision?" But perhaps my proudest accomplishment of the past year was not related to career or romance. It came from finding a way to turn my scars into a source of strength for others. One evening, while reviewing my investments, I realized I had more money than I would ever truly need for a comfortable and secure life. The thought lodged in my mind, mixing with memories of my own struggles as a student. I had gotten lucky. But how many young people were out there just as bright and hardworking as I had been, struggling without any safety net? After weeks of research and consultations with my financial advisors and lawyers, I made a decision. I used a significant portion of my lottery winnings to establish a scholarship fund. But this was not just any scholarship. The Bridging Hope Foundation was specifically designed for financially independent students who lacked family support. The foundation provided more than just tuition assistance. It offered a mentorship program connecting students with professionals in their fields. It held workshops on essential life skills like financial literacy, salary negotiation, and mental health. It was in essence designed to be the safety net I never had. Working with these students was healing in ways I never anticipated. I met a young woman who wanted to be an engineer but was sleeping in her car. I met a young man who had escaped an abusive home and was trying to put himself through medical school. In their stories, I saw echoes of my own. But now, instead of feeling helpless, I could offer tangible help. As I sat across from these students sharing my own story, without mentioning the lottery win, focusing only on the experience of lacking support, I saw a shift in their eyes. They were no longer alone. Just having someone believe in you. One student named Maria told me her eyes welling with tears after receiving the scholarship. That's worth more than the money. The most profound changes, however, were still internal. Through continued therapy and conscious effort, I had almost completely dismantled the belief system installed in my childhood, the belief that I was less than less deserving. I had learned to recognize my own value independent of external validation. I set boundaries without guilt and offered compassion without sacrificing my self-respect. This journey taught me that family relationships, like all relationships, should be evaluated based on their impact on our well-being rather than simply accepted as unquestionable obligations. True love, familial or otherwise, uplifts it, doesn't diminish. It supports, it doesn't exploit. I learned that forgiveness doesn't require forgetting or pretending the hurt never happened. True forgiveness is acknowledging the full reality of what occurred while choosing to release the binding power of resentment. I did not forget the years of unfairness or the painful ultimatum, but I chose not to let those experiences define my future. And perhaps most importantly, I learned that sometimes walking away isn't the end, but the beginning of a healthier relationship. Distance can create the space necessary for real change to occur. Had I submitted to my family's demands that night, nothing would have changed. By standing firm in my own self-worth, I had inadvertently created the conditions that ultimately led to meaningful transformation for us all. 2.5 years after a lottery ticket changed everything, I stood on a cliff overlooking the sea in Carmel beside Daniel. The salty ocean wind blew through my hair, and the late afternoon sun cast a golden glow on everything. It was our wedding day. It was a small, intimate ceremony, with only our chosen family, Chloe, Jessica, and a few other close friends, and sitting in the front row were my parents and my brother. Their presence here, not as overbearing hosts, but as welcome guests, was a testament to the long road we had traveled. They had not tried to interfere with the planning. They had respected our wish for a simple ceremony. Their wedding gift was a handmade photo album chronicling the best moments of my life. They could find a meaningful continuation of Leo's Christmas gift. On the first page, my father had written, "To Ava, who taught us that true love isn't about control, but about respect. We are forever proud of you." When I read those words on the morning of my wedding, I cried. Not tears of old sadness, but tears of release of a circle completed. After the ceremony, during the small reception at a nearby restaurant, Leo approached me. He had been promoted once at work and was dating a kind woman he had met through a volunteer group. The old arrogance was completely gone, replaced by a quiet, mature calm. "You know," he said, looking out at the ocean, "for a long time I was jealous of you winning the lottery. I thought you had it easy, but I realize now that you've had to fight for everything important in your life, while I was handed everything. You deserve all of this happiness, Ava." "We all deserve a chance to be happy, Leo," I replied, and for the first time I felt a true sibling connection to him. We just had different paths to realizing it. Life continued on with its new rhythms and quiet joys. My parents found contentment in their simpler life. My father became a respected volunteer coordinator at the food bank. My mother rediscovered her passion for teaching at the local community college. Losing their material wealth had in a way helped them find a different kind of richness in spirit and community. My Bridging Hope Foundation thrived. We were able to support dozens of students, and I began looking into expanding it statewide. The stories of those students' stories of resilience and hope became a constant source of inspiration for me. I never forgot the source of this change. The $960,000 lottery ticket still sat in a safe deposit box, not as a symbol of wealth but as a reminder. It reminded me that true value isn't in the number on a piece of paper but in the strength to make the difficult choices. The lottery win wasn't the real miracle. The real miracle was what happened after. The miracle was finding the strength to say no. The miracle was building a new life from the ashes. The miracle was learning to trust again both others and myself. The miracle was discovering that family isn't just about blood, but about choice, respect, and love shown through action. I sometimes wonder what my life would be if I had never bought that ticket. I would likely still be in my cramped apartment, still paying off debt, still craving approval from a family who couldn't give it. Our relationship would have likely continued in a state of simmering dysfunction, never exploding, but never truly healthy. Winning the lottery didn't give me happiness. It gave me a choice. It forced me to confront the truth of my relationships and my own self-worth. It gave me the tools to build the life I had only dreamed of, but I, through my decisions, had to build it myself. The money provided financial security, but the real prize was the self-knowledge and strength I gained by defending it. In the end, I didn't win the lottery by a stroke of luck. I won the lottery in order to learn how to love myself first. And that lesson that freedom was worth more than any jackpot in the world. It was priceless.